Welcome to Healthy Living, the Azure Standard Podcast. Azure Standard, your source for organic, natural, earth-friendly products. Visit us at azurestandard.com. Today we'll hear from Azure founder and CEO David Stelzer as he talks to David Cross about how to eat organic, healthy food for less. Here's David Cross.
I'll be speaking with David today about something that affects all families: how to eat healthy, nutritious, and preferably organic food and stay within or even minimize the family food budget. Organic food is often cited as being high-end, exclusive, even elitist, and that any benefits of buying organic food over conventionally grown food does not outweigh the increasing cost for the average family. And yet, with the recent media attention on conventionally grown foods and the residues of herbicides they may contain, is it worth finding a way to make the switch to organic, non-GMO food? Today, we discuss how to reduce your family food budget and eat healthy food for less. Is there really a way that you can feed your family organic food for the same price as conventionally grown food? Let's share some ideas about, how families can eat nutritious food for less.
The cost of food, and you have to remember that food costs traditionally, and still to this day, conventional food costs have been subsidized. At least in America, the government subsidizes food costs. They subsidize grain production, they subsidize egg production, they subsidize all kinds of, there's a program for a very large portion of what people eat. In fact, conventional wheat farmers make at least 50% of their income through subsidies rather than actually selling the grain. So that is one aspect to keep in mind. It's very popular, politically expedient for a government to show that we have low food prices. That said, the other side of that, for the reason that food prices have gone up, is number one, the packaging. Everything is becoming more and more convenient. Many things are becoming semi-pre-prepared. The cost adding into that for packaging, for preparation, for artwork, for all the different things that goes into that, all has to be, and of course, taxes that have been added. They say, oh no, sales tax on food. Well, sales tax is not the major. There's excise taxes. There's a lot of taxes that go into the cost of food. So you add those things in, the packaged goods are going to definitely it's going to force the price up. And it's going to force the price up. And many times, poorly packaged or bulk type options almost become unavailable because the packaged goods that actually have higher profit margin for the food companies, because they're adding more value, begin to take up all the shelf space. So when we're thinking about the cost of food in general, and as far as organics goes, yes, you can get the same processed food, much of the same processed food options in organic. You've got classic options such as Amy's that's been doing processed frozen dinners and meals for a very long time. They're wonderful products. I'm not saying anything bad about them in any way, but if you're going to use those things, it is going to drive the cost up. You can't buy those items because at the same price as that you can buy the ingredients that go into those items, because there's a lot more packaging involved, there's a lot more processing involved, there's frozen transportation instead of dry transportation. It all adds to the cost.
What should people do? Eat less prepared, processed food? Is that there's always been that health consideration, or you should eat more fresh fruit and veg, and you should not eat processed food. But it's very convenient, and one of the things that I always have felt is that over the years, people seem to have less and less time. So how can a family start to reduce its food costs?
Well, number one, eat at home and cook at home. Now, we found, from a personal experience, I can probably, the number of times that we have actually taken our family out to a restaurant, I can probably count on my fingers in the past, say, 5 to 10 years. Very, very rare occurrence in our household. Partly because, there's a lot of, I have a lot of kids, and taking everybody out, it's certainly nothing we would ever do locally. And if we're on a long trip, we typically wouldn't do it there either. We would go to if we couldn't take food with us, which we usually try to do if we go somewhere, to take at least some of the basic bulk staples, we would go to a grocery store or a health food store if possible, and buy a bunch of ingredients to even, cook our own meals. Obviously quick ones. You're not going to make, something that takes all day long to do. But we can make the food relatively quickly, even when we're away from home, even at a hotel or whatever. Especially if you have a burner or a top or something like that, it's pretty quick. And I can tell you from personal experience, our food budget has actually gone down. We have paid less and less. Back, some years ago, we used to do some of the processed. We've been purists in the sense of, we eat organic food and all that, but, it would be tempting to pick up a case of Amy's burritos now and again. But when we realize how easy it is to make those things and to to do it so much better. So number one, our meal costs have gone down to less than $2 per meal per person. In the low, just barely over $1 if we add it up. Now, granted, I also don't take into consideration, we do have a garden. And we add in the costs of seeds and stuff like that, but we don't necessarily add in our work because that's our therapeutic piece. So we do grow things, the cost of seeds and starts and stuff like that is added into our food budget, but the cost of labor and that sort of thing is not. So, I will say, we do cheat a little bit that way if we were in a location that we could not have a garden. And I know most people, probably the vast majority, can have a garden if they choose. But, some people can't. If you're in an apartment in a skyscraper, it's probably not possible. At least very much. You might have a pot out on the deck or something, but a real garden is not possible. But we eat, we have a garden for fresh vegetables, at least during the summertime. We don't have to buy, lettuce and we even put up, green beans and things like that. We'll freeze a few beans and the basics. But so number one is my wife put together a very extensive pantry. So we have in our house a special cupboard that's dedicated to being a pantry for food. She put together 2-gallon buckets for the basics, for most of the basics. Some of the things we use more of, we have a 5-gallon bucket. So we can buy a 25-pound bag of some of the beans and flours and stuff that we use more of. And then 2-gallon buckets for nuts and, popcorn and just, everything that we use frequently in our ingredient list. And then she also put together, we have, for things we use less frequently, spices, things like that, then we have a third tier. So that would be like for salt. And those are like in, 1 gallon. They hold like a gallon Rubbermaid type thing. Right. So we'd have salt, we'd have nutritional yeast, we would have, arrowroot powder, things like that in that size. So you could buy a 5-pound bag of that. And then we have a whole, like 1-pound size collection mostly for spices.
Right.
We like our spices. In our house, we use not necessarily just hot spices, but we love things like oregano and thyme and these kinds of, and so we've got a whole drawer, probably has 20 to 25 spices in it that each hold at least a 1-pound bag of spices. So after putting that pantry together, we now have pretty much everything that we need, all sealed up so moths can't get into it or anything like that. If that were to happen in our house, we have all the ingredients there, and all we have to do is go through that whenever we're, usually every other week in our case, to every once a month. And then, we have specific liquids. So we have a shelf for olive oil and vinegar and things like that, balsamic, the different things that we use in the liquid side. And we normally don't repackage that. We usually leave it in the bottle. It's big enough to hold a gallon. And other than, not too much do we buy in a bigger quantity than a gallon. Even in my house, we will occasionally during the summer, if we're making pickles or whatever, buy a 5-gallon of vinegar, or a 5-gallon of honey during canning season, possibly. But for the most part, that gives a place to put everything. It's all labeled. And we know, it's quick at a glance to see what's there. Now, after doing that, there's very little emergency food. We have everything we need to make everything at home, and it's quick, it's easy, and if we even put the slightest bit of planning into food prep, it's dinner time, we need to have dinner in 15 minutes. We have a menu for that. We can do quinoa, that cooks really fast.
Highly nutritious.
Highly nutritious. And we can do that in 15 minutes. So we can put together a dinner in less time than it would take to go get seated, drive to the restaurant, get seated, and wait for the chef to make the dinner. We can make a great dinner. We call it quinoa salad, but it's a little different than traditional quinoa salad, but we'll maybe have a little bit of that, fish and stuff. We love to cut up, cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff like that with our quinoa, and create a great quinoa salad. That you can do something like that in 15 minutes or less. If you have a little bit more time, then you can eat a little cheaper with rice, beans. Get very creative. But in our house, we like beans and potatoes. We like being creative with beans and potatoes and rice. Those kinds of foods, highly nutritious. Potatoes especially, we get a little more gourmet and do sweet potatoes, yams, purple potatoes, things like that. But we really like that stuff. And it's inexpensive. It's cheap. You can buy a 50-pound box of potatoes for well under $1 a pound typically. Even a 5-pound bag is less than that most of the time if you can't buy in larger quantities. Rice is less than $1 a pound. It swells. The water adds into that because it's a dry food. Beans the same way. So it becomes very inexpensive.
It was funny. I was remembering there when you were saying that when you go on a long trip, you very often take a lot of the food with you. And the town I come from in England, Blackpool, it's a seaside town. It has been famous for many, many years. 1876 it was officially founded, and Queen Victoria used to go there in the summer for to take the sea air. But it has been very popular for many years. With many of the working class towns in England would come there for a weekend or for a week for a very cheap vacation. And my house was about 5 minutes walk from the sea when I was a kid, big sandy beach, and we had a lot of families coming from the Midlands of England, from Birmingham, a lot of families from India, Bangladesh, and they would very often cook their food in the car park next to the beach. And so you would have these amazing, basically Indian food parties. And there was even a film made about this called Bhaji on the Beach. And they would sit around and they would make breads, chapatis, and different kinds of curries and rice. And it was, I mean, you can't imagine in America having a stove well, I guess it's like a tailgating in a way, but like imagine, a car park at Target or something, and someone pulls out a stove and starts to make a quite elaborate, but it was just part of growing up. But it just had a very fond memory when you said that you take food with you when you travel and you prepare it. And I think that really these families would essentially make home-cooked food in the car park next to the beach, and then they would enjoy the afternoon on the beach. So I think it's a skill that's been lost is preparation of food at home or home-cooked food wherever you are.
And home-cooked food is really the key to eating less expensive per meal. And so by doing that, so you ask why organic is more expensive. And, truthfully, it costs more to produce organic to begin with.
Less subsidies.
There's less subsidies from the government. That's the number one piece. Number two is that the inputs that you use, and hydrous ammonia is incredibly cheap. If you get right down to it, you're having to use real protein inputs for fertilizers. You're also having to spend more hand labor dealing with insect. Instead of just flying a plane over and putting poisons down, you actually have to pay attention. You have to hang disruptors in trees. There's more labor involved in that. So in real life, it does cost more in a direct sense. But if you talk about the indirect costs of conventional food, they are much higher. That is just subsidized by all of society. So not only the government subsidies that are very direct, that everybody pays for in their tax dollars, but you also have the environmental costs, the costs of the glyphosate in the water supply, and now poisoning people inadvertently. You also have the environmental costs, if we're talking about packaging, all that extra packaging ends up, it costs a lot to produce that. The air pollution that's caused in the plastic industry, once you rip that package open, it goes back into the landfill. The cost is substantial. That is not directly related to what you pay the teller at the grocery store.
So what is Azure doing? I mean, we've talked a little bit about what people can do. They can, get a classic pantry. They can prepare meals at home. And, if you don't have time to prepare the meal, you've outlined the fact that it's actually quicker to have a number of meals that you can prepare quickly, nutritiously, like quinoa, and rather than, go out. You can also prepare more and freeze it or vacuum seal it, canning you've talked about. So there's lots of things that people can do. What's Azure doing to help people eat for less?
Well, the number one thing is Azure is really concentrating on the bulk ingredient part. Azure sells a lot, and we want to be able to offer that. We want to be able to offer the Amy's dinners and all of that, and we can and will. But where Azure really comes in and what we're really concentrating on is being able to supply you a great deal on these bulk foods. So the bulk foods, like your ingredients, your 5-pound bags of nuts, your 25-pound bags and 5-pound bags of rice and grains and beans and flours and baking products, your baking sodas and whatever else, spices. We've really concentrated on the ingredients, that and getting better pricing on that as well. So by buying more, we're also concentrating on selling it to manufacturers, so we can create better pricing for everybody by getting more and more direct to the source, importing it directly in the case of imported goods, buying directly from farmers in the case of domestic goods. And we're getting better at that all the time. And that's definitely our goal, is to be able to offer the very best ingredients. Organic ingredients, for the most part, is what we're concentrating on. We still do have a few conventional ones, and typically they're cheaper, but we're really concentrating on the organic ingredient side. And we want to be able to give that to you without going through all the packaging. So we have created our Azure Market bag. It's a paper bag. It sews up the top. It's 100% recyclable. You can recycle it in both paper and you can recycle it in cardboard.
I have a bag in my hand, but these are great.
Pop open the bag, drop it in your, if you have containers, you can also leave it in this bag. The bag is pretty good. We did not add a clip to the top because obviously that's a wire, changes the recycling quantities, but you can certainly use a clothespin.
Yeah, you just roll it over and use a clothespin.
Roll it over and use a clothespin. It works really good. You know, we do that, even though my wife has a pretty elaborate system. If we try something new, we usually do that for a few days to decide, or a few weeks, more like it, to decide if it's something that's worthy of a regular container. It works good. It's pretty safe. I mean, insects and stuff don't get into it very readily. Not that they can't. They could if they're, and certainly rodents or anything like that is not completely immune from that sort of thing.
Right.
So it needs to be stored in a safe spot.
You know, I've done an analysis over the last few weeks, and I looked at some of the classic breakfast, lunch, and dinner dishes, and common recipes, and then I've compared the cost of shopping at some of the well-known major supermarkets and chains, and then buying inorganic, and then also the same items. The ingredients purchased from Azure, and then also comparing some local restaurants. And clearly the local restaurants are much more expensive, but on certain things, Azure is definitely considerably cheaper. If you look at the cost of the dishes, buying organic from Azure, in some cases, is very slightly more than buying inorganic from a major supermarket. In some cases, it's less. But if you take your family's groceries and your meals on a weekly and a per meal basis as a whole, I tell you, it's absolutely hands down clear that buying from Azure is less.
If you're going to make your own meals at home, or some of them, buying the organic ingredients in bulk through a pantry system, or even if you don't have a pantry, just buying them in bulk. And I'm not even talking big bulk, I'm talking 5-pound bags here in many cases, is less expensive than buying the same ingredients conventionally at the supermarket and preparing the exact same meal. Because there's less packaging and you're buying in a little bit more efficient manner. And when you think about the cost of, to your family specifically, and I talked a little bit about the unintended cost of conventional food to society, but think about the unintended cost of conventional food to our families. And many times, think about healthcare. Does organic food keep you from having to visit the doctor as often, or needing as much health care? And, in my family, I feel like, we can be a living example of that, having, raised 11 children and only had one basically doctor visit even, other than a couple of physicals for driver's licenses and sports and things like that.
Sure.
But one doctor's visit for any kind of an ailment, which happened to be an injury, a broken leg, in roughly 30 years of raising 11 children, our doctor bills was pretty low.
Yeah.
It wasn't very high. So if I look at my, experience compared to my parents' experience, who spent, even on me, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over time on insurance and whatever, because, ended up in the hospital for this and that and the other. And I look at other families around me, I don't think it's gotten better in society. It's gotten worse. They build new children's hospitals and stuff. It does make a difference. And when you think about the cost of autoimmune disease, autoimmune, for the most part, most autoimmune is directly tied to microbioflora and gut health. Over and over, that's tied together. Gut health has everything to do with what you eat. And many times the unintended things that you eat, such as the glyphosate that we've talked about earlier, accidentally eating that by eating conventional products that have it sprayed directly on them. You're genetically modified, you're ones that use it as a desiccant, i.e. things like wheat and sugar and beans. That stuff is going to have very high, if you're not getting organic, it's going to have very high glyphosate content, just because it's used to help the product mature and harvest more easily. Other things that have come up since conventional agriculture has been not even mentioning the nutrition content and the extra nutrition that is in food, which hopefully we'll be able to talk about in a future podcast here real soon. But other ailments that have taken place in the last few years, things like autism, is increased from an almost unheard of thing 40 years ago, of extremely rare condition, to now, I don't know anybody who doesn't know somebody who has autism, or 3 or 4 children, or young adults that are autistic in some way. Autism is directly related to nutrition. There's some link to vaccines with that as well, but it is primarily linked to conventional agriculture, genetically modified food, and poor gut health. Autism can be prevented. Sometimes it can even be cured through extreme makeover of the diet. And these things are unintended costs that happen at the family level. So even if you did have to pay more, would it be worth it?
And would
That's
the overall
my question.
cost be less?
Is the overall cost to your family budget going to be less to eat organic and healthy food? And by the looks of one single doctor bill, you can eat a lot of good food for the cost of just a little bit of medical care, or even medical insurance for that matter. Can you decrease your insurance costs by doing more of a minimum essential care if you know that you're covered in the big stuff because it's not going to happen? You can get things, essential care, accident coverage, and things like that if you know you don't have to worry about these autoimmune type diseases that have driven up the cost of insurance so terribly much. And I'm not talking, I'm not advocating insurance in any way. I'm just saying that in my household, I don't feel like I have to be covered in every way because I know that's not going to happen.
Right.
So some of it is the unintended cost, and in organic, knowing what is also in the food, i.e. better nutrients, and what's not in the food, chemicals, glyphosate, things that are going to destroy the gut microflora that helps us to digest our food. It's going to create leaky gut, create these autoimmune diseases and allergies and other things that are really rampant in our country today. Organic food can make all the difference in the world. And what I'm saying to you today is you don't have to pay any more to eat organic than conventional if you prepare your own food.
Exactly.
Decreasing the cost of health care in our nation is a big thing, but especially in our family. And who wants to be sick anyway?
Right.
I am so much happier to have my children, having to visit them, running marathons and 5Ks, than visit them in a hospital someplace because they're undergoing some procedure or another to try to get well again.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the difference.
Well, thank you for sharing with us some ideas here. I think you've outlined very clearly how any family can eat healthily for less. We'll be sharing more about this over the next weeks and months, I know. But thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
This has been Healthy Living, the Azure Standard Podcast. Thanks for joining us. For more information about Azure Standard, please visit our website at www.azurestandard.com. Azure Standard, your source for organic, natural, earth-friendly products.